dude, if you're putting in the work and you're striving for something and you're doing something you believe in, that's what matters, dude. Anything else is white noise.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Hustle Up podcast, dedicated to all the movers and shakers out there grinding past a traditional 40-hour work week to create a life by design and quit living life on default. If you're tuning in via video, you may have noticed that we've moved. We thought this was a little bit cleaner. Today, we are excited to host Connor Judson Garrett, aka Young Judd. My name is Clint Crow.
Jonathan Hesse.
Yee.
Yeah.
And welcome to Hustle Up. Connor, good to have you here today.
Thank you.
Connor, ladies and gentlemen, is a man of many talents. When I first met him, he had founded an app called StudyHubb, which was a lot like Tinder for finding a study buddy. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot like Tinder for finding a study buddy. Entrepreneurially driven. He's also an author for at least 5 books that I know of, 2 that are out, another 3 on the way. And in the car today, we came up with an idea for book number 6. It's going to be on longevity. I think it's pretty cool. I won't divulge any more details there. But Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with entrepreneurship, and in particular, the ability to take a side hustle, a passion project, and create an alternate stream of revenue. I know that you created an app as well recently.
Yeah.
I'd love to dig in that too. Let's hear a little bit about the Connor Garrett story.
Yeah, so basically where it started off was I was in college, and I went to Berry College, which is like this little small school up in Northwest Georgia. And, out there, all the students that went to school, they would go and they'd meet up with each other, but in the library, they would use it as a social place. It wasn't just like an academic thing. And it kind of got me on this whole train of thought about how do you multi-purpose? Like, everything that we're looking to do is to reduce friction, especially in business. It's to figure out how can we simplify a process. So in this case, students were wanting to socialize, they were wanting to, study at the same time. So it's 2 birds with 1 stone. And at the same time, Tinder was roaring in popularity. And part of the reason why Tinder did so well is because they reduced friction in that same way. So it kind of became like eating a bag of chips, right? When people get on the app, they just start swiping and swiping and swiping. Mm-hmm. So I saw that and I'm like, okay, well, this would be an interesting way to test out this little theory, right?
I'm curious, do you have a best opening line?
A best what?
Opening line?
Like an opening pickup line?
Yeah.
Actually, no, man.
What about for StudyHubb? How do you entice a study partner?
Well, when we were promoting the app, what we kind of had to learn was that, even though we got a lot of downloads through comparing it to Tinder, we learned that we had to be extremely careful with comparing it to that because, the guys on the app actually got really creepy towards the girls. So sometimes you can't control the consumer behavior, but you can sort of distance yourself from things that you can't really control. Like, people are going to do what they're going to do on a messaging platform. Yeah. And as long as they're people of the opposite sex, like on anything, there's always going to be that.
So how do you go about distancing yourself in a conducive way?
Yeah, so ideally, if you have funding, you'll also make technical adjustments as well. But in our case, we really didn't have funding. None of us could code. Me and Alex Chung, you guys
How'd you get the original app made?
So initially it was out of pocket, and then we raised a very, very small investment of about $10,000, which you guys know when you're talking about apps, that's nothing. It's really not a lot. So it was enough to kind of get an MVP up. We were able to get 10,000 users on the app, but our app started crashing.
For anyone who may not know, what's an MVP?
A minimally viable product. So just basically saying that it didn't have a lot of the functionalities we wanted. Eventually we wanted to actually add in filters for GPA and things that would sort of continue to separate us from Tinder. And eventually even we were building out a learning management system online, so this way students could take courses and other things. We wanted to have a whole ed tech suite of products, kind of like Google, but we wanted to be like the first cool, fun, hip ed tech platform that there was out there. But we hit a bunch of roadblocks, and honestly, with our inexperience at the time, we really weren't prepared to handle them. so then basically that whole process led me to, led me and my partner originally to working on kind of creating a marketing firm, because we had to make money. So that kind of ties into, how do you make money on the side? It's like, frankly, look at stuff that doesn't really have a lot of overhead. So if you have a talent or a passion or a skill, figure out what is it that you're already kind of doing. So if you're already in the process of selling yourself, which we had to for StudyHubb, in order to get those downloads, we had to go out and
build a brand.
Yeah, we had to do it. We didn't have money for marketing, so we had to go out and we had to talk to consumers individually, all the college students. So we actually dressed up like college students, everything. There were even days where, we tried different things out. Like one day I dressed up as a Wookiee, Alex dressed up as Yoda. We did like everything we could. This is probably not that great, but there was even a point when people were smoking cigarettes out in the courtyard. We went and bought cigarettes. We did cigarettes for downloads. I mean, like, whatever you got to do, man.
Yeah.
It's truth is, look, business isn't always you want to operate with ethics as best you can. It's like sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get that thing off the ground. And so we were honestly willing to do whatever it took, but eventually we got tired. That's the truth. But the point is, we transitioned into marketing. And so we got club clients, we got some chain clients like La Vida Massage and things like that, Supercuts. Would always recommend working with startups and individuals over chains personally, just because there's a lot less red tape and bureaucracy to go through if you want to really be able to control the brand and get faster results. Would definitely recommend that. And then from there, that gave us the money to then put in for Typewriter, which was, it's called My Typewriter. It's a typewriter app that uses like vintage fonts and things like that. So we have like
you can find this on the App Store, Google Play.
Yeah. In fact, it got up as high as number 14 for all iOS utility apps.
Nice.
So currently it's a 4.5 on the App Store. In fact, Tom Hanks actually has a typewriter app that we're beating now. We're ahead of him. So we're the number one. If you just type in typewriter, even, you don't even type in the whole thing, you'll find us on the App Store. Google is a little hard to find because, they're just two different platforms. That's it right there. So it's been kind of nice because the bottom line is we understood that market. So I understood from seeing like Instagram and everything that you have all these poets and all these writers that are on there, that poetry is perfect because it's bite sized. It's almost like nowadays, especially, you have almost this like coffee mug type of poetry that's really working out there. It's enormously popular. If you look at people like,
what is coffee mug poetry?
So there's your more traditional poetry. Let's say there's a spectrum, right? Your more traditional poetry, your traditional writing is on your far left, right? And let's say that's like your Pablo Nerudas of the world, your Octavio Paz, where there's like depth to your language and there's lyricism and it's unique and it's skillful. It's gems of language, right? And then on your far right, you have stuff that'll be like, almost reads like a fortune cookie. So what I mean by that is that when the reader is reading something, right, they want to see the best version of themselves. It sort of panders to that intent. And so when they're reading it, it's like, she was beautiful because she was broken. Okay, a girl that just got out of a breakup, she reads that, she's like, oh fuck, that's me, right? And so she's like, shit, I'm gonna share that, I'm gonna promote that.
Situational, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like, but that's how that stuff gets viral and that's how it's spread.
Like astrology.
It really is. And it's funny because I've noticed that a lot of times the types of people are the same people that, will be into astrology, will be the ones that are reposting things from Atticus or Christopher Poindexter or whatever. So it's just understanding that market and being like, okay, I'm going to take that and realize that we can actually, seeing that a lot of these poets were already using typewriters, old vintage typewriters, as their go-to when they were promoting this stuff. They were literally typing it up. I'm like, we could create an app that uses that, so it's already built in marketing, and it works.
And it has the satisfying key sounds.
As the key sounds, we recorded it at an antique shop. We were just typing away. We recorded that, sent it to the coders, everything. That's learning outsource. If you're not good at something, outsource it. And now, currently, we still get like without doing anything, we make $300 to $500 a month off the app, like every month. Passive income.
Easy.
So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So tell us about Lucid House Publishing. How'd you get into this? What age? Yeah, just dive in.
Yeah, of course. So Lucid, I'll give a little background. So my mom's actually an author and journalist as well. She focuses more on nonfiction, so writing biographies for people. Like she wrote the biography for the guy who started Iams Dog Food. His name was Clay Mathill. Sold off to Procter and Gamble. So he ended up being worth $3.6 billion. You know, so at the time that ended up being like a 5-year project. It was a very long project. She's written, I think, like 14, 15 books, and really mostly focused in that genre. Right now, she's working on one for a guy named Jim Markham, who started a few different hair care companies. If you've heard of Pureology, for any of you guys that are into the hair care industry, he was really big in that realm, and so he's another billionaire like that.
I promise you, I use Dove Men, and when I run out, I've got that extra size bottle of Perk Plus. It's just chilling.
The 2-in-1s, man.
That's right. Can't go wrong.
No, but she, you know, her experience was she then went on though. She had this book called My Own Duffel Bag that actually sort of spun off into a nonprofit that has now helped tons of kids in foster youth that are aging out of the system actually find, you know, college scholarships and things like that. But the point is that book sold a tremendous amount of copies. They sold like 60, 70,000 copies, I think, on their own. But it was a self-published book. And they were doing extremely well. Then they got picked up by Random House. And traditional publishing works very different from hybrid and self-publishing. So a traditional publisher pretty much ends up owning your stuff. They might pay you in advance, or they might pay you a little bit of money. But then they own your stuff, and they can pretty much lock you up. And they can even get to the point where, like, let's say you have your stuff distributed into stores or anything like that. You can get to the point where you might even be essentially charged if it doesn't sell and it sits in a warehouse. You might be getting charged for that as well. So there's all types of ways that the author's profits actually end up getting eaten away at. And it's really not.
What kind of percentage are we talking about?
So a traditional publisher might end up taking, it's usually for sure going to be over 50%. But they might take up to 90% of the author's royalties. So the author might be left with 10. You also have to remember, Amazon takes 30 to 70%. So by the time it's all done, the author is left with literal crumbs. So again, if you're you know, Anthony Kiedis, right, of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, you might get a massive advance. Or let's say that you're you know, Jeff Bezos.
Because they expect that book is going to sell.
Exactly. So for them, it's like, that's fine, you know, because they know the book's going to sell. Their name has enough to absolutely ensure sales. But for kind of the mortals among us, you know, it's like, if you're really, you know, if you're not a good marketer, if someone comes along and offers you something, if you don't know how to promote yourself, you know, maybe take that traditional deal. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you're a savvy marketer and if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, there's nothing wrong with going in that self-publishing or hybrid publishing industry now, because like in our case, what we do is we flip that model. We say we don't own anything that you create. You know, our branding will go on it, sure, because we're in business. We're trying to spread our name out too. But we'll take 10% of your royalties and you'll keep 90, right? Because I'm a writer, so I think like, how would I want this done? Like, how would this appeal to me? Like, what would be a favorable deal? How can we do this in a way that like...
Well, how is a franchise run, right? Like, if you go buy a Panera or a McDonald's, you're not giving away 50, 60, 80% of your earnings, right? So if you could make it author friendly, and then, you know, you take 10% off the top that you are employing, you've published a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen authors, that 10% starts to add up. Yes, and you know, it's not enough, but it's good. That's enough to cover operational expenses and to, you know, let's say you do have something that's a real banger and starts to sell, then like that could be really nice. But again, I want to see our authors benefit the most from that. What we do expect though is that, look, we're not going to take any project. So a vanity publisher might go in and they might be like, okay, look, we're going to just accept any manuscript that comes in here. I have people that, you know, they might hit me up about their project, and the reality is it's like they want to write a book about something, but they haven't really found themselves yet. So it's like their story, they want to write this narrative because they've
they've done whatever, but they don't have that big thing that kind of caps off their journey, and they want it to be a nonfiction memoir type thing. It's like, it doesn't really work if you don't have something to sort of say, like, okay, you know, like in your case, like, okay, I've started a really successful roofing company, you know, I've started a really successful, you know, tent rental company, right? Or you started an amazing company, you've raised money, you know how to do all that's something tangible. But, you know, going and like finding yourself, right? But you're still lost, and there's not really that epiphany. It's like there's nothing to write about yet. It's like, you got to keep going, man. You know. And so we charge for cover design. We'll charge for online setup, like the basic publishing fees. We'll make sure that, like, for me, my main thing is that my business partner, who does a lot of the design, and I couldn't do what I do without him. My main thing is that he's covered. Me, most of my money comes from freelance writing, actually. So the publishing company, eventually, I want to get it to where it's bringing me in plenty of money. But right now, I'm trying to make sure that my partner's compensated for his time. Besides that, I want to make sure that our authors are, you know, doing well and that they're happy with what we do.
Are you familiar with the artist Russ?
Yes.
You know Russ?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he does all of his own beats and his mixing and his mastering, and he writes his raps and his hooks and all the other stuff. Is there a Russ of the author world? There's somebody who writes a book, edits the book, self-publishes the book, and they're bangers?
I want to be Russ.
Hey!
I'm not yet, but that's what I want to be. That's what I want to be. Yeah, absolutely. But I think right now, one person I can think of that comes to mind, and you know, it's like, you don't want to shout out a rival, but I'm not there yet, so I'll give it to him. It's like, someone right now that I think does a good job is this guy Tucker Max. He's written a bunch of I think, you know, it's like PUA, like pickup artist type books, whatever. They did really well, New York Times bestsellers, but he went on to start a company called Scribe Media, and they do an extremely good job with their marketing. They've been able to get some really high level clients, and that's an independent press type of thing. So I gotta say, I'm pretty blown away by that company and what he's doing. So I'd say Tucker Max is one of those that understands what he's doing from a business perspective.
Cool.
Yeah.
We'll have to look him up.
Yeah. Would you consider Lucid a hybrid publisher?
Yeah.
What is that? Because you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Like, what if I use Lucid, but I'm keeping 90% of my revenues? Is that not self-publishing? What's hybrid publishing?
So here's the thing: if you really have a good understanding of how to design covers, if you really have a good understanding of how to edit and format a book and market your book and do all of the rest of that, everything that, you know, having a book entails, from product to market fit, everything, like branding, all of it. If you understand all that, you know what, I would actually say I recommend self-publishing. Don't use us, seriously. But if you want some assistance and you want that help and you want someone that's kind of be the cavalry for you, then you use a hybrid publisher. So a lot of writers, especially like the really successful ones, understand nowadays everyone has to be their own marketer. You really, like, it doesn't matter, anyone you work with, like if your book's gonna be a success, you really have to also be a marketer. Your publisher can market as well, but you need to be a great marketer. So I guess what I would say is, like, what actually makes us a hybrid publisher versus a self-publisher is just the fact that we can help someone bring a book to market. We're a collaborator, right? But again, like, I'm serious when I say, look, if you want to keep as much as you can and that's your goal, and you really have a good grasp on market and all the rest of that, seriously, put it out there yourself, keep more for yourself. I'm a believer in that. Like, you are the product, you know, you're an entrepreneur. But I will say this, a lot of writers don't know what a good cover looks like, even though they've been looking at them their whole lives. They don't know what a good cover looks like. They don't know how to market themselves. They don't know what even a good website looks like. So there's just a lot of other things that maybe in this demographic isn't really quite grasped. So it's not bad to have another pair of eyes on it.
What's a do or don't of a cover for a cover? Do and don't.
I think you just need to think from a psychological perspective. So we were talking about this earlier today, actually. It's like, okay, does your cover really match up with your title? You know, is it an attention grabber? And it's the same rule. Like, we were joking around about this subtitle we were working on for our, like, concept even earlier, and it's like, does this subtitle and this title, does it work like clickbait? Like on the internet nowadays, there's just such a fierce competition on the internet, so you have to kind of write clickbait. Now, the reason why clickbait is used in sort of a derogatory way is because a lot of times there's not the value actually added to people's lives once they click on the article, right? But the concept behind clickbait, getting them to click, grabbing their attention, it's the same. Like a cover should be written like clickbait. It's like, so we were talking about the word secret. There's just certain words that are triggers that you're like, well, what's the secret? You know, does it make you ask a question? Is it provocative in some way? If you're left and you like, there's no tension to it. If there's no tension to it at all, if it just falls flat, it's like, okay. If everyone's going to just sort of agree with it, be like, okay, well, now what, and move on, you're going to gloss over it, then that's a bad title. So going back to the cover, it's like your cover design needs to sort of take that title and do something interesting with it, take it a step further. I think the title is more important than the cover, because again, that's what people are searching on Amazon. You know, that's what you need them to find you through. But the cover has to align well with that. And I would also say just making sure that if it's a photograph, making sure that you understand what good photography is, and then sometimes understanding like what the perception of the author will be, you know. So it's like if you put yourself smack dab on the cover, it's like, what is that really saying? Is this a book where you should be emphasized as like the point of it, or is this bigger than the individual? You know what I mean? So just some things to think about.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
What are your current books on the market right now?
My personal one?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the first one that I put out was Life and Lyrics, and that was sort of a way of also, it was a poetry book, but it was a way of showcasing a little bit of what we were doing with Typewriter. So every single poem in there I actually wrote out in the Typewriter app.
Hey, talk about a plug. That's cool.
Yeah. So it was a way of like kind of cross-promoting there. And then the more recent one, very fresh, is actually Become the Fool. And I was
Shout out, Become the Fool.
Yeah.
Pick it up, bro. Show.
Yeah. So I was actually really into. You can find this on Amazon.
You drew the cover too, didn't you?
Yeah, I drew. Well, so I drew all the drawings in here, which, you know, it's just kind of fun. And you know, so it's up on Amazon. But one of the things that I was super inspired about was actually Leonard Cohen. He was a really big songwriter. He wrote the song Hallelujah, which he went over, you know, hundreds of times. And one of the things that he did in his book that was put together kind of posthumously was his son actually included all these drawings and sketches he did, song lyrics, poems, journals, everything. And there's a certain looseness about it, a certain messiness about it that I kind of liked. And, you know, it's like when someone's not around, it's sort of a two-sided coin, right? Like when someone's not around anymore, certainly the book or whatever it is, the work after they're gone, isn't exactly what they would put out. And a lot of times critics hate that. They're like, oh, this doesn't sound like them. No, actually, it sounds just like them. It sounds like what they really were, unfiltered. And there's something beautiful about that too, you know? So, like for instance, like a lot of people have issues with some of the music that was put out after Kurt Cobain's death, and understandably, because we all know that a certain someone was probably trying to profit off of that.
Yeah.
And rhymes with Rodney Ruv. but you know, there's some interesting stuff in there too, and you can see the stylistic makeup of what led to Nirvana and all of that. And so in the same way, like Leonard Cohen's book kind of gave me a certain freedom. And from that, the title Become the Fool was really about sort of returning to that place of self-love, and or a place of not non-judgment, but a place of like a more objective judgment than the sort of devilish whisper that sometimes gets in our ear. Where
Do you have a piece you could read?
Yeah, for sure.
That sounds awesome.
Thank you, man. Let's see here. Yeah, you know what? This is sort of the opening poem, which was intentional. It's actually called Become the Fool. And it really ties up the theme of the book, which is why I started off with this in here. So, we are souls in the flesh, specters caught between the limbo of yesterday and tomorrow, an illusion of the present, an imposter in this skin. I am rain blown sideways by the wind. My art, my love, my hunger slows the descent. I spread out like a shadow on the pavement, stomped on by what is, saved by what is not. But is and is not are so fickle. And dreams and reality dress up as one another, playing musical chairs in the mind. And if you are so lucky that a dream seizes the throne and turns your mind into an imagination, do not revolt, do not resist, become your madness, become the fool. Right? So it's about going back to that place, right? Where you're like, you know, childlike in that way.
Yeah, you're not socially programmed to think
Exactly.
and live a certain way.
Exactly. So it's just about trying to cast off those chains.
Why is that such an important message to you?
Because I think we can tell ourselves a lot of untrue things. We can tell ourselves like, hey man, you know, I'm not that smart, or I'm not so whatever, and it's just getting to a place where it's like, dude, it's not even about, you know, whatever you think you are. It's about, what are you doing, man? Like, are you actively trying to be joyful? Are you actively trying to like spread your love and your good vibes? And I'm not trying to sound like a hippie over here, but it's like, are you actively trying to spread that out? Or are you so worried about the comparison game of like, because, you know, it's like I grew up very competitive because, you know, it's like you grew up playing sports, grow up playing soccer, basketball, whatever it is. And, you know, we're, especially in America, we're raised in a culture where it's like, dude, you know, you want to be alpha, you want to be number one, and that's great. Like, there's a certain element of that you got to hold on to, but it can also be very toxic. And so it's about figuring out how to take the good that competition and these things bring, while also making sure that you're not internalizing certain parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of it. I could rant on this. But.
No, go. I mean, because I agree, because it's all about finding that peace and not being attached to outcome.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
really what it's about.
Process.
Because that's where
It's
fear.
all about process.
Yeah, all about process. And you know, there's a lot of cliche quotes that go into that, like, live for the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
You know, don't be attached, or don't have expectations. Like, these are all things to help you stay in that foolish perception of presence.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what it is. It's
Yeah.
just fully dialed in, which, you know, it is kind of a hippie way to talk about it, but that's what it is. Like, it's energy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had this assertion before as the Hermetic principles, and like
Right.
listeners, you know, guys, look it up. 7 Hermetic principles. They're pretty dope and pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's what if you can dial most, well, if all, or if, you know, I'm gonna say most because I never put all on anything, but if you can dial back most religion, philosophical, and science, and if you dial that back, they all come down to these 7 things.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, it's like the law of rhythm, the law of vibration, the law of duality, the law of polarity, the law of mentalism.
Boom.
And 2 more. Yeah, I can't remember what the other ones are. But
The feminine and masculine one, though, I think is a bit redundant, because when you look at duality, and you know, it's a bit.
Well, duality and
that
polarity.
for somebody who might not know.
Well, I think real quick. I think what it is. So duality. Go ahead if you have a point.
I might not have as deep of a grasp on this. I really might not. But I do remember that towards the end they were talking about, you know, the feminine and masculine principles. But it's like when you already have duality there, it's like that's a bit broader and it's a bit scientific. I think that it's a bit too human centric to deal with femininity and masculinity.
But it's not. It's like
the duality of man is the inner conflict inside the individual, right? You've got the Dr. Jekyll and the Mr. Hyde, and all variations of that. Whereas the masculine versus feminine energy it's more of a macro approach, right?
Well, kind of, because even more dialed in, the feminine energy would be Dr. Jekyll and the masculine energy would be Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
So what I think it is duality is the fact that there is a female and a male energy that exists, and the polarity is the interaction between them. Because they're polarizing.
But isn't that kind of a subcategory? Anyways,
No, it's a cause and effect. So I think, like, you can't say that. Well, because I guess it's not, because you think psychology is human behavior and sociology is human interaction, right? So those are 2 same level size categories, same thing. Do you see what I'm saying?
But I think duality is more referring to like the universal force of duality. I think it's more talking about kind of like almost like the give and take.
There's 2 sides to every coin.
Yeah.
A male and a female.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But they're kind of redundant. Yeah, kind of.
But we know that there's a male and a feminine energy that exists in every person and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But how do they interact without a method of them moving? What they're just these energies that exist without the polarity, the polarizing effect. If the law of polarity didn't exist, they would never come together. Potentially, I don't know.
So are we saying that the law of duality is that there are two energies,
Right.
and the law of polarity is that
The interaction.
But in the Hermetic principles, I'm saying like there's duality, but then there's 6 of them that are totally fine. They're awesome. There's like vibration, rhythm. There's like all kinds. That's awesome. But there's one that I feel like is just personal opinion. I think is a bit too human centric, which is they talk about they get into femininity and masculinity.
Yeah.
Which I'm saying if you already have duality, those things to me could fall under the umbrella of duality, because that's just like, okay, you have duality in everything else, right? I mean, shadow, light, like everything else, right? White, black, whatever it is. And then you all of a sudden go, and it's like in humanity, if you're talking about even human energy, if you want to call it that, if you have on one side,
what do the Hermetic principles matter without human beings though? Are they not all human centric?
But that's the thing though, is that like then we're saying, okay, you have to separate humans from the universe, when it's like, to a certain extent, we live in like a fractal universe, right? So everything is sort of a microcosm of something bigger or smaller, right? Self-repeating patterns.
I think the universe exists so we can observe it.
I think when it says that the Hermetic principles are the laws of the universe, it's the human perception, ... now quotations, the laws of the universe.
Okay.
So, I mean, it could be different for like a spider. I'm sure a spider has different laws of the universe. For example, birds move contingent to magnetic fields. We do, but we don't identify. I could go to California or New York right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But birds are only conscientious of moving in vibration with magnetic fields or polarity, or, whatever the word is. But anyway, another interesting thing is male and female, or masculine and feminine energy to begin with. Like, and another thing that we've talked about before is that when art meets business, because that is when feminine energy meets masculine energy. By definition, feminine energy is the arts, and logic is masculine energy. Now, it's important to say, for anyone who doesn't know about feminine and masculine energy, like I'm super in energy, so I know every bit about it. Like, I think energy is huge, and what I like to do about it is take like a scientific way of looking at it, as far as I can only know how it works for me and my perspective and how things work out, but I have a practical way of looking at them and meritocratizing information.
Is that a word?
If it's not to run
putting information up through the meritocracy.
Meritocracy, yeah. So I learned, like what is the science proof of feminine and masculine energy? What's the religious context of it? What's the philosophical one of it? That's really my meritocracy, is science, religion, and philosophy. And so masculine energy is logic and things like that, and feminine energy is art and more intuitive ways of moving. And it has nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation. It has nothing to do with that. It's just simply a polarizing
two different
energy.
Types of energy that are. So when we're talking about polarizing, are we saying they are at odds? Is this like a magnet?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
They repel or attract?
Yeah, and that's how I feel like that's how things kind of manifest in your life, is like the polarizing effect. And they say that sexual energy is the strongest energy in the world, right? Harnessing that. Have you guys read what the fuck is that book called?
Nuclear is a pretty big deal.
Transmutation,
Yeah.
Master Key System.
Not the Master Key. Well, yeah, but Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, and it talks about sexual transmutation and harnessing that sexual energy, like, because that energy is the strongest, and that when a man comes with a female and creates a child, that is what sexual energy is, why you should harness it. And so it that's the biological reference of how feminine energy and masculine energy work.
Yeah, so that energy is powerful enough to create life.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so if that's what keeps the species going, it's the most, but it's also, that's like the most practical surface way of looking at it, right? Because you could have a female that's an absolute hustler, right? And a guy that's a nurse, and they be in a relationship, in a completely polarized relationship. But that doesn't mean that,
Shout out to all my male nurses out there.
Yeah.
Out there killing it.
Yeah. Meet the Fockers, you remember?
Yeah, he is.
He's a nurse, right?
Weren't they all doctors too?
Huh?
Weren't they all doctors?
Well, the dad was like really rich in the CIA. Like about his
that's
master.
right.
Just think about how they portray it in art, you know what I'm saying? Like the more hustler grinder kind of boss bitch quotation the girl is, the more nurture or badass of a guy she's going to be, the more art or creative or, go by the gut, go by the feeling.
Do you think male artists, are typically nurturers though?
No, but I think, nurturers. I don't know.
I don't think Kanye's a nurturer, dog.
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think Kendrick is a
I
nurturer.
would have to say, based on what I've seen, at least especially with writers, no. Writer,
Male
artists,
male artists are selfish.
But nurturing doesn't have to apply to just children.
Think about Hemingway, for instance.
Nurturing
is one example.
Those famous writers go hard.
Dude.
Yeah, so you're
Very
nurturing your
selfish.
craft. Like nurturing doesn't have to apply to a child. But like you're very emotional about growing something.
I heard the idea that that artists are already in a relationship with themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's too late if you love one.
And the other thing too is that where it becomes really tricky in art and in writing is that you sort of can't help it, but you have to look for muses, and there are healthy ways for that to sort of manifest itself in your life, but if you're not careful, then that can mean, if you don't learn how to, draw inspiration in a healthy way, it can mean that you end up sacrificing relationships, especially with women and stuff like that.
Well, especially art. I mean, think about it. Some of the most beautiful pieces of art, regardless of what capacity we're using art as the definition, comes from some of the most painful, distraught people.
Yeah.
And it's like the most beautiful things come from the darkest places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm a big believer that if you're, and this is kind of a funny conundrum because I think about it too, because I'm a big creator, art, you know what I'm saying? I got a lot of music too that I make, and some of my best stuff comes from some of the most emotional places. It's like, if I'm not in an emotional place, can I be creating at the same vibration?
And there are definitely techniques, and again, we talked about that before. It's like, can you figure out how to get into a stream of consciousness? Can you figure out how to tap into that quickly, right? Using word associations, using thought association, image association, and again, like we said before, it's like a synesthesia of thought. Can you get these things to sort of cross into each other?
Yeah, no doubt. That's interesting. So what's the next step are you gonna focus on building Lucid? Are you gonna keep writing books? Because you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
So how do you forget that, because I got a better question that's more macro.
Yeah.
Taking all of what I said just into consideration, how do you break down what you focus on a day-to-day to maintain a steady pace of progression?
Yeah, I have to sort of put a calculation into things. I have to look at, okay, for me, my major thing is what am I going to be proud of right now? That's my first thing, is sometimes it's not always, I could spend more time writing copy for corporations and brands. Right. I've written some for TextSpeed, ZipRecruiter, it's there's really good money in that actually, really good money. And it's I could spend more time doing that. And, for instance, right now, after I'm done with the book I'm working on with Michael Chiara, it's a fitness book. I'm trying to knock that thing out and really put out something pretty nice with and for him. But my transition then will be back into doing more copy, doing more travel writing and stuff. But I'm literally taking a financial hit right now because I care about this project and I'm trying to make sure that it comes out well. So I guess on a day-to-day thing, it's bottom line is what do you care about? What matters to you? That's what you're gonna get done. Honestly, if you don't care about it enough, it's gonna be left there and it's gonna fester and it's gonna rot. But if you love something and you're about it, it'll get done. Yeah. So I'd say on a day-to-day, it's honestly, I'm more of a night person. My mornings, sometimes I'm slow to get going. That's the truth, but I try to make myself get up and get moving, and mornings are actually really hard for me. I don't always start off the day in the best place, that's the truth, but I work towards it, and then by night I'm happy as hell and I'm grinding and I'm going.
If you start off having kind of a groggy or slow morning, how do you pick yourself up throughout the day to? You know what?
It's self-talk, man. It's self-talk. It's knowing yourself and knowing what you need to hear, and it's knowing. For me, one of my I guess downfall, not even downfall, it's not the right word, but something that I've struggled with in the past is like letting the past be the past. And so that's even something I've recently been really thinking about, is like, how do you sort of let the past dissolve? How do you not keep giving it power? How do you not keep trying to reanimate the dead, right? Like, how do you let it just be what it is and let it mummify, let it just be there, right? And that's tricky.
Well, wait, how do you do that?
Well, and I think a big part of it is just by, frankly, having dreams and having things that you're actually actively striving towards, and surrounding yourself with good people. It's like people that are doing things that are cool and that you're like, okay, you know what? Because a lot of times seeing is believing, okay? So it's like, if you want to believe in success, look around you, see it, right?
Yeah.
Like, see it. And I'm not talking about in the way of like, you know, I'm not saying spend all your money to go to, you know, see Tony Robbins, no hate there, but it's like, I'm not saying throw all your money away to go to all these seminars around the country and keep doing that, but it's just like, look for people all around you. There's mentors everywhere. There's people that are doing cool things that you might not even know how cool it is. Like, maybe you haven't tried to start a business yet, but even making like actual money, like turning, you know, revenue positive in a company, being able to pay yourself a salary, hard to do, really difficult to do, takes a lot of work. Admire it, appreciate it. Like, you know, it might be a company it might be a plumber, might be someone that started their own plumbing company. Guess what? That might sound like some boring shit, pun intended, right? But it's like, dude, you gotta understand that there's a lot of money in that business, whatever it is, man. You know, and if that buys you time freedom, you know, I doubt that person when they were 5 years old was like, you know, I want to be a plumber, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it as they got older, because you know what they understood? It's not about what I'm doing. It's about what I'm going to not be doing, right? Because they now might be able to retire early. They might be able to work different hours than someone else, right? Because they're able to get that thing profitable. They're able to get it going, you know? We talk about automation of processes. If you get this thing moving, you're in a totally different spot, you know, than other people. You're not tied to, like, okay, honest, I was on Tinder yesterday. I was swiping through. I saw this chick was like, you know, on her bio it said, you know, if you don't work a 9 to 5, don't hit me up. And I thought to myself,
dumb,
fuck out of here.
Yeah.
You know what?
Well, you got to think she probably. All right, just coming from, because she's probably
get it, totally cool.
She probably dated someone who was an entrepreneur and saw, because you know, but it's a huge level of commitment. So she could be like, okay, if you don't have that level of security,
either she's really dumb or really smart.
She's really short-term focused.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she's trolling all the actual entrepreneurs. Be like, fuck you. That's like her, you know, maybe
she's like, only the real entrepreneurs will get me.
Whatever. All I'm saying is swipe left, because there's a lot of, you know, because I've seen people that don't understand like what you're doing, don't understand what your vision is, and it's like, there are going to be some times as an entrepreneur where you're going to look like a boss, and there are other times where you're going to look and kind of feel like a loser.
And 95% of the time.
Dude, yeah. So it's like, you know, what do you want reinforced? You got to have people around you that also believe in the vision, that believe in what you're doing. It's like, and you know, don't be self-deluded. Like, you have to recognize for yourself, are you really working hard? But you know what? If you are working the same hours someone else does, like if you're still putting in your 8-hour days, but maybe you're working at 3 in the morning instead of, you know, waking up at 9 a.m., whatever it is, it's like, dude, if you're putting in the work and you're striving for something and you're doing something you believe in, that's what matters, dude. Anything else is white noise.
So that's a major focus of this podcast. There are 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
8 are typically devoted to sleep.
Yeah.
8 are typically devoted to work. Let's say you, on a bad day, you've got 2 hours in traffic. That still leaves 6 hours in the day that you can devote toward your passion project. If you just use 4 of those to figure out how to turn what you're already doing into money. If you play video games, let's live stream on Twitch. You better get good at those games. If you make music, put your beats up online, put your songs up online, start getting plays on YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is. Everybody's passion project looks different. It's individual to them. It's their own creative stamp, their own energy. But that drive, that entrepreneurial hustle, that process looks the same over and over and over again. And whether it's 4 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour, the steady hours that stack up throughout the week and the month and the year could slowly turn into a business.
Yeah.
And if you're not ready to quit your day job, if you're not ready to quit your main
Do it.
hustle,
Find the time on the side. Replace your Netflix. Replace whatever
That's
else.
right.
Just add it in.
turning it into an extra form of revenue that, as that revenue grows, maybe you will be able to quit your 9 to 5 at some point. It might take 1.5 years, it might take 3 years, but wouldn't it be better to start the ball rolling sooner than later so that you can find that freedom, the time to travel, the time to do whatever it is you want to do?
Dude, your passion should be a reward system for everything else.
That's right.
Like, if you really love what you're doing, dude, it shouldn't be like, oh, I'm working my 9 to 5 and then I gotta put in more hours to build this thing. It should be like, dude, I'm working my 9 to 5 so I can put in these hours to build this thing because I love it, man. That's what it should be. And if it's like, if you're getting caught up on, oh man, I just don't have much social time. I just don't have much what the fuck ever. Fuck you. Honestly, it's like, I don't know, man. People get so caught up in just thinking that you have to do things a certain way and that you need to be, stuck in this certain routine. And it's like, dude, and you know what I'd say? If this extra stuff, let's say you think you're passionate about something, but it still feels like work, there might be elements within it that do feel like work.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But on the whole, like, if you're making music after work, right, and that's what you want to do next, that doesn't feel like total work. There might be elements within it where you're like, okay, how do I learn this new program? That might be hard. There's always a learning curve. There's always something that feels uncomfortable where, you're going from, practice, which is like, okay, yeah, you're chopping wood, you're used to that, you get used to it, versus deliberate practice, right? Which is, you've been chopping wood, now you have to turn sideways and you have to strike the tree. It's a different thing, right? Or you're using some other tool that you're unfamiliar with. That's the other thing. 10,000 hours, it's not just 10,000 hours of a rote activity. It's 10,000 hours of differentiated things within that.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're just treading
water. Explain what you're talking about in case people don't know.
Yeah, so in Outliers, they talk about, growth mind. Well, that's not really Outliers. They're talking about putting in your time, right? What makes great people great?
Like, what qualifies you as an expert?
Yeah,
At what
as
point
an
are you
outlier.
an expert or an outlier in a subject?
And one of the big conclusions is simply that you've put in time. That's what they found with the Beatles, right? The Beatles at one point were playing for like 8 hours a day over in Hamburg, Germany. I probably butchered that. I probably said that it was American. They were Hamburg, Germany.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know what? They were working 8-hour days. And according to people that knew them at the time, they weren't that good when they went to Germany. But they came back playing like bosses because they were putting in that time every single day.
No, I heard about, I actually heard a Beatles 8-hour comparison on a podcast the other day on Tim Ferriss, and essentially it was, George Harrison, and he wrote My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Yeah.
He wrote that because he went and deliberately, back to what you were saying, seeked out mentorship from Eric Clapton. After he met with him, he played every day until his fingers bled.
Knew that.
Yeah.
I love Eric Clapton. I never knew that. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah. Came back after weeks practicing until his fingers bled every single day. He pumped out My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Dude, My Guitar Gently Weeps. And what a perfect title for that too. Man.
The Beatles are on some crazy.
They were. And if you're a Clapton fan, I'm sorry, but Tears in Heaven, gotta say, that's like one of the most heart-wrenching, beautiful songs ever written.
What makes you say that?
Well, for one, the backstory behind it, obviously. So if you've ever dealt with like miscarriage, or you've ever dealt with like losing a child or anything like that, that is a really, really, really important song because it was based on his son falling. I think his son was like 3 or 4 years old and crawled out of sorry guys, this is a bit morbid, but he crawled out of a window of his apartment, fell, like ton of stories, died. And that was what the song is really about. It's, would you know my name if I saw you in heaven? He's talking about like, would you actually, right? It's just beautiful lyrics. It's an interesting way of telling a story.
It is, yeah.
What do you think about interdimensional love?
Interdimensional love? If I'm understanding that correctly,
do you have the same love in another multiverse?
You're talking about male and female, the same masculine and feminine energy recreating through different realities.
Well, so
I don't necessarily know that I believe in, I'm not so sure that I'm sold on consciousness being something that you retain after death and these things like this, right? Of a certain kind of consciousness. So we have a human consciousness, which is based on the present form we're in, right? We have neurons firing, we have things going on that are unique to the human body. Not that other animals, of course, they have neurons going on, but you have your consciousness is based on brain activity, essentially, right? So like once your brain is no longer working, do you still have that same consciousness? It's debatable.
What about the idea that time is a flat loop and you repeat the same life?
That's where things get fun. It's possible. It's definitely possible. But then you'd also have to wonder if you're talking about a flat loop, then if what happens here, does that then affect, if it's going in a loop, could that then also affect what happens in these other things, like a butterfly effect?
What if it's like Interstellar, where things in the future affect things in the past, affect things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, okay, I think ultimately my feeling about it is like, I would love to believe, for instance, that deja vu, right? For example, I wrote a paper on this during college for physics. I was writing a paper about deja vu essentially being transmissions from these different dimensions and things like that.
So you should pay heavy attention to deja vu?
Not necessarily, because they can also be, I do think that you can see certain stimuli in dreams and other things. But again, if we're going to go down the rabbit hole, who's to say that those aren't transmissions from other dimensions and things like that?
What you dream in the sixth dimension is what I've heard.
What you've
heard?
heard?
What I've heard. I'll link it right here.
What's up with the sixth dimension?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know there's 13 of them, and I know we exist obviously in the third dimension.
Are we talking about the lattices, like the mathematical next dimension?
Yeah, but math just
That's just the representation.
That's correct. Yeah, that right. Yeah. I'm not.
Dude, I'm pretty sure they have like an E39. Like they can go pretty far out.
What's an E39?
So it's a type of lattice, and so we'll have to figure out how to draw this diagram on a post-production. But if you have a two-dimensional plane, you've got two squares, right? And they're just flat squares. And then to get 3D, you connect these two squares to form a cube. Now you got yourself an interesting little cube. It's a little fucked up cube, right? But
I like it.
Then to form the next dimension, to get to the fourth, you take two cubes. We go, oh, Mr. Cube. Hi there, Mr. Cube, I'm a cube. And you connect them to create some type of supercube. And now you're in the fourth dimension. And then you keep building and building. Well, they've created these insane, they're called lattices or lattice. It's a lattice. And it's a mathematical model and geometric figure that represents these dimensions, and they get beautiful, man. They're fractal like, they're very intense, but and you know what, there may be like an E1 zillion. Can you look that up? Can you fact check?
Yeah, I'm looking up the 13 dimension things, and yeah, dude, that's what you're talking about, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so the 13 dimensions, Metatron's cube, ancient. Yeah, it is the same thing. You're probably, well, what did you call it? 39.
I know they go farther than 13. Like
on math,
earlier, like
right?
on paper, they can. I'm for sure there's an E39. You remember that tattoo my sister got?
Yeah.
Hers is like, it's either a 39 or a 76.
Now, is there science? Because is there an active science on this? Is there active scientific study?
There's an active math.
Well, science. Remember, science is the scientific method based off what we can calculate.
Okay.
We can't explore the next dimension.
Okay, but
right?
Is this theoretical?
This is metaphysical. Yeah, this is
metaphysics. But there's metaphysics. So
yeah, no. This is science. This is math.
No.
Okay.
These are mathematical models that we have tested.
Wait, what metaphysics has been proven?
Well, for instance, the fact that the observer can change reality. So if you look at the split test, that's a real thing.
Schrodinger's cat.
So there have been proven things.
That's quantum physics. Metaphysics would be the effect of that.
I mean, I still think we're trying to figure out how the quantum physics works, right?
That's what I'm saying. It hasn't been there.
I thought
It hasn't been proven or
metaphysics-
disproven.
I thought quantum physics was a part of metaphysics. I don't know.
Let's look it
I
up.
don't know fucking.
I don't know.
Yeah,
This seems like hey.
I'm gonna. Oh, the laptop's in use. Start being young Jamie. By the way, I want to give a massive shout out to Young Karma in the back. He may have popped in on screen a moment ago. Young Karma is helping out with all kinds of things for the Hustle Up podcast. Young Karma is a G.
Shout out Young Karma.
Shout out Young Karma.
Quantum physics is a scientific theory that describes and predicts the behavior of subatomic particles and 3 of the 4 fundamental forces, namely electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear forces. Quantum physics does not make people telekinetic or clairvoyant, and astrology is not a branch of metaphysics. I guess it is the same. Well,
because you know what even with the Schrodinger's experiment, it is a subatomic particle test. Like,
Dude, they did some crazy experiment where they put one neuron in Hawaii and then they sent it halfway across the world.
yeah.
And enough, the instrumentation is enough to measure it within like 1/1 billionth of a second. And by observing it, they could see that it changed instantaneously. So what this whole experiment, in case that didn't make sense to everybody, what this experiment shows is that neuron, like when you're observing, it was electron, not a neuron. When you observe an electron, it's communicating with through quantum entanglement, it's communicating with the other electron faster than the speed of light. We're able to observe it, and this is what's upsetting is the speed of light is supposed to be the governor on all forces in the universe. Nothing is supposed to be able to travel faster. But somehow there is instant communication between these electrons that are quantumly entangled. Now, if I have any old school friends out there who are out there doubting this and saying, it's a little crazy, you can look this stuff up. These are experiments that have been done. This is fact. This is science. It's crazy, is what it is. But instant communication, shoot, they're making black holes in Switzerland. So we're either going to figure out how to jump through the universe, or we're all going to start moving towards Switzerland really, really quickly.
Like that quick.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Switzerland.
At least we won't know what happened.
Yeah.
As a kid, when I heard that, I always thought like I would, I'll know that I'm being taken to a black hole, and I'll have all that dread and apprehension, and
what if we went through a black hole 5 minutes ago?
Now we know it's just a good old friendly black hole.
You think it's possible to jump dimensions and not know it?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. If I go from here to here, I'm moving through.
You're moving across
tons
a plane.
Yeah. But this plane is comprised of many different dimensions, but photons create us to only see it in a 3-dimensional way.
It'd be funny if sleep, this is really ridiculous, but it'd be funny if sleep was just needed because you were so exhausted from interdimensional travel all day.
Yes, 100%. You know what the double slit theory is?
Yeah,
that's what
you were just talking about. What Hawaii have to? Was that part of?
That was separate.
It's a separate experiment, but it's it's probably on that same channel of YouTube videos.
What is the difference? So we could all probably just Google this, but what's the difference between quantum entanglement and string theory? They seem like they'd be related.
No, well, okay, they are related because they're both a part of quantum theory. But string theory is the idea that at the basis of all atoms, you have little vibrating strings called quarks, right? And so the new agey, I fuck with this, new agey idea is that at its base, everything is just vibrations, little vibrating strings moving rapidly in and out. The problem is, though, that quarks are blipping what appears to be like in and out of existence. So sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not, and I suppose that it is a traditional theory that they're jumping in and out of dimensions. Okay. So they're just there and then they're gone. And the idea is that they're moving into different dimensions. Like we all share
a set of quarks or vibrating strings. But quantum entanglement, is that what you asked? Quantum entanglement?
Yeah, I was wondering if they're like how tied together they are.
Well, they're tied together in that field of theory, but quantum entanglement says that for every electron, there is going to be another electron spinning in an opposite direction, right?
Okay.
So, but here's the thing: you don't know which direction they're spinning, but if you observe it, this is what's crazy. If one of them's spinning, if you know which direction one is spinning, but you haven't observed the other, and you send it that way, then when you observe this one, the first electron starts spinning the other direction. Like you can tell, that's what you were saying, by the observation, we can change the direction just by looking at it, that an electron's spinning, which makes me wonder if this isn't all some piece of code. Or like some grand, like why is that? Why is it that we can observe an electron and it like that's a hint, right?
Wait, have you ever noticed this though, that everyone always wants to like go, okay, so we always get interested by consciousness specifically. Like what's the peak of creativity, right? Creativity as in creation is consciousness, right? It really is.
That's a fun joke, dude. Somebody put that in as like, hey, this is a glitch in the matrix, ha ha. Keep searching.
But see, that's the thing, is everyone always wants to explain consciousness by higher consciousness and higher consciousness and higher. But it's like, at what point does that sort of stop? And like we were talking about earlier in the car, it's like, okay, for instance, in that book, The Longevity Paradox, it's talking about how, you obviously start off with single-celled organisms, and then, as they're creating more and more oxygen as a byproduct, then they have to adapt, and so you end up with plants, and then eventually, animals and then humans along the way, and ultimately the way you described it, which was a funny but true thing to say, was like, ultimately we're meat bags, we're houses for bacteria, and so we were talking about longevity and how you can increase your longevity by essentially becoming a better landlord for your bacteria, your good and bad bacteria tenants. And all of evolution, all of your creation is essentially a battle of good and bad bacteria making these things up. And so it's like, again, consciousness is funny because yes, we're at a point where we can kind of call ourselves conscious, but really I always wonder this, it's like you have an instinct, right? Like an instinct, what I mean is almost like you said coding. Coding would be a certain kind of programming in a way, right? So everything is programmed to act a certain way for its survival, for its longevity, right? So then at what point does an instinct become consciousness?
But dude, we are the only thing on planet Earth that goes against its coding, right? That goes against natural coding and breaks the mold. Everything else does what the fuck it's supposed to do. Dogs pee the way they're supposed to pee. They sniff around and find the perfect
Well, there's certain
spot.
things we can't avoid. We all have to take a shit.
Yeah, I mean, and there's certain ritualistic or instinctual things
Right.
that human beings get into, right? But, no, there was a good point. No, there was a good point.
I believe it.
And it's gone.
I should have talked about shit, man.
It's systems within systems.
It is systems within systems, and the meat sack idea is really cool until you get into the meta, right? Because yes, we are meat sacks carrying around probacteria and nasty bacteria, all kinds of stuff living on our skins, whatever. But are you familiar with the concept of the wisdom of crowds?
Are you talking about collective intelligence?
Well,
Collective
it is
IQ?
collective IQ.
Yeah.
So
The Aristotle
James
has a
Zerwicki.
project. The Aristotle project is really big on that. That's literally what they're measuring, is how to get the most out of teams.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, how to get the most out of teams. They have these crazy experiments where the first, I think it was Ben Franklin, but I'll double check. We'll let you know if I'm wrong there. Pretty sure it was Ben Franklin. He's the first person to figure this out. He's in a group, and the group's job is to guess the weight of the cow. And if you can, so we're there at a fair. If you can guess the weight of the cow, you get the cow. And back in the day, cow is solid. Nobody guesses the weight of the cow. But Ben Franklin writes down each of their answers and takes the average, and it's within 0.2 of the weight of the cow.
And he's not taking, he's taking the outliers. He's taking the ends of the tail and including everything. So your most wild, that cow weighs 30 pounds. That cow weighs 4,000 pounds. But the larger the sample size, the more accurate the number is. Yeah. So this is wild. So I feel like this is, Google is doing stuff to measure the collective consciousness, the collective IQ, the collective intelligence. We've got companies out there working on this already, but they did something as insane as an example from the book. A ship goes missing. And so they have all these experts trying to find the missing ship. They don't find the missing ship. So they pulled a team of, they crowdsourced it. They put the scenario up, all the details that they had, involved the research of the internet, and all these people come together. They have astronomers, they have meteorologists, they have people who understand the movements of the ocean. I don't even know what you call those. Marine biologists. All these people come together and they decide, we're going to find this boat. Well, they plot it on a map, and 2 days later, they find the boat. It's sunk. It is sunk. But they find the boat less than a quarter of a mile. I think it was even closer than that. Wow. Less than a quarter of a mile from where it was supposed to be. There was this whole storm involved. There's no way they should have known. But the collective IQ is so ridiculous that it can make these predictive analyses that could be the future of how a lot of decisions get made.
Well, that's what AI is.
That is, yeah, and that's my problem with the meat sack theory is the world does some crazy stuff, and people in particular do crazy things. We survive meteor explosions and years of things trying to kill
one thing,
and
by the
eat
way,
us.
though, when we were describing this, just so people really understand it, is that, again, when we were talking about single-celled organisms, using basically us because of the fact that the world became more and more oxygenated. So it wasn't just that was one thing we forgot to really mention, was that they go and basically they evolved animals so they could continue to survive in your intestines and your gut and all that, because that then ties into gut health and all this other kind of new health and fitness science as well.
Recently it's been discovered too that DNA holds memory. So
DNA holds memory, and we are years of evolutionary survival strategies. We are at the peak of evolution, and whatever moment you're experiencing right now, if you can hear us in the future, if you're in another dimension, if you're tuning in here, we are at the peak, the forefront, the edge of the curve of any consciousness.
Bring us forward, by the way. If you're hearing this, bring us forward.
Yeah, in the human experience, any consciousness in the human experience. And I want to say I'm a little narcissistic, and then I want to say we are the aliens.
Yeah, I was gonna say to anyone listening interdimensionally, we come in peace.
But on the real though, we're a warring group of bastards. Like human beings are like if somebody actually does come in peace, they've got to be appalled, because we kill a lot of things.
Yeah, remember
we tear things up
to America. Anyway, conspiracy theories for another day. Yeah. Connor, you got anything else to say?
Young Judd,
Connor Judson Garrett, link right here. Check out his Instagram, check out his book.
Where can we find you, Connor?
So my Instagram is at Connor Judson Garrett, lots of doubles, so ConnorJudsonGarrett.
And if anyone wants to talk about getting your book published, does Lucid House have a website?
Yes, we do. LucidHousePublishing.com.
Awesome, easy. Thank you for coming. This has been awesome. We kind of hit everywhere, all over the spectrum.
We did.
So if you're listening, thanks for listening. If you're watching, thanks for watching. Spread the love, spread the word. Get yeeted, get
on. And yeet on those business decisions.
That's right. Yeet on them all. Thanks for watching. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Clint.
Connor.
Until next time. Nice.